It's wonderful to see all of you, and I think the most important thing I can tell you after seeing the film and meeting those wonderful teen council members is that I started this work as a peer educator. So I have been at this a long time, and I want to say to Maricela and Maddie, the job is all yours when you're ready. So, I don't need to tell all of you that a lot is changing in our world. And even though I sometimes joke that I started doing this when dinosaurs walked the earth, the truth is that 25 years ago, when I was in college, I still was typing my papers on a typewriter. And it was a big deal when we got a new phone system where we could organize by sending 6 messages to people at a time. Now, immediately when you get access to cell service outside of this room, we did that on purpose, by the way, so you'd have to listen to me. You will actually be able to tell everybody about this luncheon by doing a post on Facebook or doing a tweet to hundreds and hundreds of people. So we know the world is changing. But the reason I've been able to work on this issue for so long is because the truth of the matter is that our sexuality is at the very core of how we live our lives as human beings. And I'm actually going to prove that to you because I'm an educator, and so of course I'm going to make you do some hand raising and things. You heard I've been in school like for a bazillion years. So how many of you have ever made a life decision based on a relationship? Admit it, admit it. Many of you have even made decisions about whether or not to have children. That's a very life-changing decision. So the truth is, no matter how much the technology changes, the desire to get into meaningful, intimate relationships is a core part of what we're all about. And that's why making sure that young people have wonderful, not just adequate, but wonderful sexuality education is absolutely critical to all of us. The good news is, I have lots of good news to report. You may have heard that the teen pregnancy rate in this country is at its lowest levels in recorded history. That's great. And I'm proud to tell you that here in Oregon, you have the 13th from the lowest teen pregnancy rates. However, I do want to stir you up. I mean, why don't you have the lowest, okay? By the next time you have me come back and do something, let's get there, okay? The other thing, though, that's really striking is it's all about the point of comparison, isn't it? There was a new study that came out yesterday that once again showed that the United States continues to have the highest teen pregnancy rates of any developed country. So even though we have dropped considerably, we're still the worst. The other thing that we have to really worry about is that it's gotten much better for some young people, but not for all. And we're now in a moment where there are tremendous disparities in sexual and reproductive health and too many other health issues as well. So sticking with teen pregnancy, the pregnancy rates for African American and Latino teens are twice as high as they are for white teens. That's just not acceptable. Furthermore, there are 20 million new cases of sexually transmitted diseases every year. Now, you are eating, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. We're just going to stick with it's a very big number and there's a lot more to do. We also know that young people continue to have huge numbers of questions about sexuality, and I think we want to get those questions answered by responsible adults, by Planned Parenthood educators, by trained peer educators, and by all of you. And here's why. I did some very up-to-the-minute research this morning when I was getting ready to just take a look at what happens when young people do the alternative, which is, of course, to Google or look on YouTube. And if you Google, "Why does sex hurt?" up comes WebMD. Okay, I was actually relatively happy that up came WebMD. It certainly could have been worse. However, when you look on WebMD, suddenly I'm hearing, and okay, I promised you because of lunch I wouldn't do the STDs, but I'm going to do a little bit of what WebMD had to say about this. I could have vaginosis, there could be something wrong with my cervix, I might have PID, and on and on and on through this list. But for a teenager, the key message wasn't there, which is that sex shouldn't hurt. So we need to make sure that we have programs and that we have information in the digital space that actually speaks to teenagers. I had an opportunity yesterday to spend some time with the Planned Parenthood educators who continue to use a wonderful sex education tool, the anonymous question box, right? And many of you realize that you, even if you had a pretty good, well-intentioned health teacher, might not have had the guts to raise your hand and ask the question in front of everybody, right? It's hard to admit that you don't know something as a teenager. In fact, it's hard to admit you don't know anything about anything when you're a teenager. I have one who's 16 years old. So we talked about the kinds of questions that they were getting in the anonymous question box, and there were the usual questions about what I call the logistics of sex. Who puts what, where, when, and how, right? What's too big, what's too small, what's just right. This is the part where I'm looking to see how we're doing. As soon as I saw that they were typing this in, I thought, well, it can't be worse than when I was on Fox News, and they were just running, you know, sex pot underneath or whatever, but they're keeping up very well. It's great. But the more powerful questions are really the ones that you heard in the video, and they are things like, what if one person wants to do it and the other doesn't? We really want young people to have a good, responsible answer to that question. Or, and we hear this so much from our LGBTQ young people around the country, how can you be yourself when others don't want you to be? The fact is, these kinds of questions would not be going in the anonymous question box if our Planned Parenthood educators and our teen council members weren't making powerful connections with young people. And how does that happen? It doesn't happen when Planned Parenthood only has the opportunity to go into the room once for 45 minutes. It happens when we can do programs that really work. And here's the really exciting thing in my field. We have learned over 20 years of actually evaluating programs what we have to do in order to help young people not only learn information and get their questions answered, but actually make good decisions and have the human skills to follow through on those decisions. And we refer to those as evidence-based programs. Doesn't it sound like we ought to be for evidence-based programs in this country? The interesting thing is, up until 2010, all of the federal funding in this country that was for any kind of sex education went to unproven, abstinence only until marriage programs. So it's wonderful that in the last 4 years, we have turned that funding towards evidence-based programs. And here in Oregon, Planned Parenthood Columbia-Willamette partnered with several other Planned Parenthoods in the Northwest to implement the Teen Outreach Program with the largest single federal grant for one of these evidence-based programs. So the top program is not this one and done kind of a program. Rather, TOP is in the classroom for an hour a week, every single week for the school year, and it requires young people to be involved in community service. Now, I think we've all sort of community service, that all sounds well and good, but I want to tell you about a couple of my favorite projects that I've learned about this week. I think my all-time favorite that the students thought of themselves is that they held a prom in an assisted living facility. They made the playlist, they did the decorations, they dressed up, and they went and they danced with folks. And let me tell you, when I get there, I would like them to throw another prom. I would be more than happy to come to that. We're all ready to come. They made bandanas for dogs and cats and took them to the Humane Society that said, "Adopt me," so that more animals would get adopted. And then on the more powerful side, they've done a huge amount of work with food banks. And you know, many of the kids in the TOP program have themselves been recipients of the food at the food banks, and then made comments about how powerful it was for them to be on the giving side of that equation rather than the receiving side. So Planned Parenthood is going to be able to actually reach 5,000 young people with TOP this year, in addition to the 11,000 young people that their teen council trained peer educators are going to reach. So I think that's wonderful news. I also want to tell you about the newest kid on the block, which is their HEA program. In the HEA program, again, they're training teens, but this time, instead of talking to other teens, they're talking to medical students and nurses and doctors and other health personnel. Now, let me do that quick poll again. Anybody ever have an experience where they wish their healthcare provider had just a little bit better bedside manner? Yeah. And now that I've reminded you of this trauma, we don't have enough time to hear all your stories, but you know, you feel free to tell me on your way out. Think about if that experience that you had in the last year, 2 years, had been your very first experience with a healthcare provider. You know, we have to remember when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, that is probably the very first time that a young person has gone to the doctor on their own or had to negotiate the health system on their own. And so how wonderful that we actually have teens talking to adults about how to do that better. So wonderful programs here in your local area, which I'm delighted that you're all here to support. My job on the national level is to make sure that we also do things for young people who are not as lucky and don't necessarily have this level of robust programs in their community. So if you've been around a young person anytime recently, you know they're all walking around with one of these. In fact, you could no sooner get this out of their hand, you would have to probably chop off the hand at the wrist, right, to actually get it. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years is creating a set of apps for teens that try to compete with what young people mainly like to do online, which is like watch videos of people falling down or watch videos of cats playing the piano. So the competition is fierce for those eyeballs. But I'm very pleased to say that we've been able to combine the science of what actually helps people to change their behavior with what people like to do online with these apps. And we've got 2 future planning tools. We've actually got an app called the Kickback, where young people are invited to pick a room on the app. They are either then watch a scene where someone's being pressured to drink beer, or to smoke pot, or to go upstairs with someone alone. They have a chance to say how they would handle that situation, and then there's a video showing them what might happen. And so, of course, if their answer is a little too passive, it doesn't go too well, and if it's really aggressive, it doesn't go too well, and this is a wonderful way of reaching young people. There are some cards on your table, so I hope you will check them out at plannedparenthood.org/apps. Now, for those of you who are thinking, oh good, now I'm off the hook. They've got these apps. she's got something, great, terrific, I'm off the hook. I also have got to tell you that, and I'm doing research, you just heard, I'm defending my dissertation in a couple of months, and guess what? Parents are still the major influence on young people's sexuality. Now, I know that you find that hard to believe because I can't even influence my kid to put a dish in the dishwasher. So I know it's really hard to believe, but the truth is, when we actually look at the data, and I am looking at a data set of 1,600 parents and teens, so over 3,000 folks, and what you can see is that when parents talk to their own kids, it has a tremendous influence on things like when kids start having sex and whether or not they use protection. So I do have some marching orders for you today. Again, I am an educator. I love to give homework. So here's the first thing. You may be thinking, okay, well, my kids luckily are grown up. I'm a grandparent. I'm off the hook. No way. We all have young people in our lives, and we all have room to give good messages, make sure that young people have the resources they need, and of course we can pressure those parents to be in conversation. You know, it's amazing. Every time I see a study on the media, it will talk about that young people see either, name the number, at least 40 references a day to sex on TV or from listening to music. And in this great data set that I have, the average number of times that parents have talked about any of a number of topics related to sex, 6. 6. This is over years, right? We are leaving our kids in the hands of the media, and I don't think that's where we want them. So we've got to have the conversation. We've also really got to talk much more deeply about healthy relationships. In my role, both at Planned Parenthood and Columbia, I've been very involved in this last several months as campuses have started to take much more seriously the problem of sexual assault, which is a very good thing, although I have to tell you, when I was in school 25 years ago, that's when Take Back the Night started. There was a lot of attention on this issue. I'm not quite sure what happened. But anyway, we're here now, and there's good attention being paid. But the amazing thing is that when you think about what young people know going into college about how people actually form sexual relationships, here's pretty much what it is. In the movies, we still see people gaze across the room at each other, have little or no conversation, and suddenly they're having the most unbelievably fabulous sex, and everything turns out fine. How do we expect people to know what's in the middle? It's a gigantic secret. So I'm pretty sure the media isn't going to do it for us. And so we have got to be the ones talking to young people about how you think about what you want to do in the first place, how you negotiate, how you continue to check in with the other person, and of course, how to pay attention to ambivalence. I really think there's a very important message out there about if somebody seems hesitant, the right thing to do is not to push, it's to go, right? In fact, one of the teens, I think, put it very well. They came up with a little slogan, talk to the cutie before touching the booty. So there you have it. And of course, we all need to get the resources that we need to be comfortable. One thing I thought would be interesting to all of you is that in this data that I'm looking at, none of the kids or the parents thought their parents needed more factual information in order to talk about sex. Nobody thinks it's about more information. That's not really what folks need. They need guidance. They need somebody to listen to them and to reason it out. You're all ready to do it. Yes, I'm a little bit more comfortable because I've been talking about this for a while, so I can do it in front of 850 people. All I'm asking you to do is to talk to one young person at a time. So finally, I just want to remind you what Margaret Mead always said, which was, never underestimate the power of a small, committed group to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So thank you for being part of the not very small, actually very large committed group of folks who work with Planned Parenthood and partner with folks like me and Columbia Willamette to make a difference in the lives of young people every day. And with that, let me turn it back over to Catherine. Thank you so much.